Brock reminds me a lot of Montana, his coolness. He doesn't get rattled.
Mm-hmm.
You need your quarterback to be that way.
Right.
What he's doing, the leadership, his composure, watching him when he first took over, the velocity behind his throws. I mean, tight spiral, catchable ball, like that. I love it, man. And his decision making, he doesn't hold on to the ball that long.
I mean, I'm so happy to be a part of this team where I have these type of guys that I get to watch while I'm on the sideline. It's like I'm in the stands, being able to watch the show that they putting on for us.
All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig in a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Jerry Rice comparing Brock Purdy to Joe? Really? We'll talk about that coming up next. First, though, we're brought to you by Pig in a Pickle, the best barbecue in Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week in both spots from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig in a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Thanks to Damon. Thanks to Mary. Go to Pig in a Pickle and get you some barbecue. All right, and of course, this video brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Check that link in the description. Use the promo code KRUG, K-R-U-E-G, and they will match you up to your first $100. Jerry Rice went on Fred Warner's show and said that Brock Purdy reminds him of Joe. I mean, you know what? I mean, he should know, right? I mean, if anybody should know the mannerisms of Joe Montana, it's Jerry Rice. And just to hear Jerry compare Purdy to Montana is just music to any 49er fan's ears. And it's an appropriate comparison. It absolutely is, which is an amazingly crazy thing to say because Joe was arguably the greatest quarterback that ever lived, and Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant and he's in his second year. But there's a lot of similarities between Brock Purdy and Joe Montana. Some Jerry pointed out, some he didn't even point out. One of the ones he didn't point out is that Joe Montana was really an underrated athlete. He could dunk a basketball. He had huge hands. He had quickness. A young Joe Montana was incredibly quick. He was very difficult to sack. And when you watch Brock Purdy, I mean, I don't remember them ever citing Joe's 10-yard split, but he was quick. And Brock Purdy's trait that really stands out, and when you look at his traits on paper, it's that 1.54 or 1.55 10-yard split time that he ran in Indy, which just shows that he's got ridiculous quickness. I mean, to put it in perspective, Tyreek Hill, who's just a blur, I think has a 1.50 10-yard split. And Brock Purdy's is like 1.55 or 1.54. So he's incredibly quick, and he can get away from the rush basically almost at will. But Jerry didn't mention the quickness, and he didn't mention the underrated athleticism. He just said, it's his coolness. Joe was cool. Brock remains cool. He doesn't get rattled. Jerry went on to say, hey, man, you really need that in your quarterback. You can't have a quarterback who loses his cool. You can't have a quarterback that when the pressure's on gets rattled and is easily sped up. That's kind of what made Joe Montana Joe Montana. He was very cool under pressure, very surgical in his precision on the short and intermediate stuff, and a much better athlete than you would ever think and could easily escape and run for first downs. In a lot of ways, Brock Purdy is very similar. I think Joe had better foot speed, but Brock probably has even a little bit better quickness. And both guys just remain incredibly cool, incredibly calm. You don't see Purdy's eyes when you watch him on the end zone up close version of the film. You can see they get right inside his helmet. You can see his facial expressions. He's very calm. And for a second-year quarterback, he's oddly calm. It reminds me of Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers, in a lot of ways, remind me of Joe. Just you look at that camera and you see their eyes, and it's not frenetic. They're not looking all over the place. And it's like very calm. Like, hey, I know what I'm looking at. And I'm looking at what I expect to be looking at. And I'm processing what I'm looking at. And, so the coolness of Joe, I absolutely see that in Brock Purdy. He's very, very calm. For a second-year quarterback to be that calm is not the norm, Just say it that way. It's just not the norm. It's really unique. And then, Jerry mentioned, hey, look, the guy throws a very catchable football. He throws a tight spiral. He's a great decision maker. He's a great leader, and he keeps his composure under pressure. And he's very competitive, and it's like all these traits he shared with Joe Montana. Then Jerry points out that when you watch Brock, he's noticed that there's really good velocity on his ball, and that his arm strength is really underrated. And then he mentioned how, he gets the ball out quick, which is a big part of being a rhythm passer and staying in rhythm. Joe Montana was a great rhythm thrower as well. But the ball, Brock doesn't hold the ball all day. He processes what he sees, and the ball comes out on time with accuracy, generally to the right guy. His decision-making is really, really top shelf. But it is interesting listening to Jerry talk about how cool Brock is when he's out there, as far as you don't see him, let's just say this. How many quarterbacks at age 23 would be absolutely surgically precise and dominant against the blitz? Almost every young quarterback in the league, the whole plan of any defensive coordinator is speed him up, move him off his spot, make him a little frenetic, make him a little nervous, make him feel your rush, and he'll throw you picks. But that's not Brock Purdy. When you blitz Brock Purdy, you're giving him defined reads. When you're giving him defined reads, he knows that much quicker where he's going with the football, and the ball comes out on time with accuracy and touch. He throws a very catchable ball. That was another thing Jerry mentioned, is that, the one thing about Joe Montana, there was not a lot of wrist snap in his motion, a la, Dan Marino and some of the other quarterbacks of his era, John Elway. He threw a very catchable football. And when you watch Brock, you could absolutely say the same thing. So a lot of similarities. And it was really cool to hear Jerry kind of highlight them. He's basically on there with Fred Warner, and he's like, yeah, man, the coolness of Brock. He doesn't get rattled. You need that in your quarterback. The guy throws tight spirals, but he also throws a very catchable ball. He's a great decision maker. He's a fantastic leader. He keeps his composure. There's much, the velocity on his throws is really underrated. And he mentioned that about Joe Montana. And then he's like, hey, and he gets the ball out quick, and he gets the ball out in rhythm. And he's just like making these comparisons. For Jerry Rice to be making these comparisons of Brock Purdy to Joe Montana is really saying something. I could say it, but it doesn't carry any weight. It doesn't carry the same kind of, the same level of credibility that comes with Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice played with Joe Montana. The natural tendency is to say, no. The guys today are good, but Joe is special. But that's how good Brock has been, is that Jerry looks at Brock and says, you know what? He reminds me of Joe. That's how good Brock Purdy has been. And here we are. It's year 2. The guy's potentially going to win the MVP. He's quarterbacking a team that's favored to win the Super Bowl. In a lot of ways, this is the mercurial start that Joe had as well. Joe is a product of the 79 draft. His first full season starting was 81. They went 13-3. They won the Super Bowl. And he played very much like a veteran quarterback right from the start. And a lot of those same traits that we saw in 1981 from Joe Montana, we're seeing right now from Brock Purdy. So, only thing more exciting than watching Brock play right now is watching Jerry compare him to Joe Montana and mean it. He's not trying to be polite. He's not trying to make headlines. He sees Joe Montana and some of the traits of Joe Montana in Brock Purdy, and he's not afraid to talk about it. I just think it's one of the coolest things. Anyway, thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. Check that link in the description. Use the promo code Krug, and they'll match you up to your first $100. And thanks to all you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.